الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
الحمد لله نحمده على فواضل النعماء ونشكره على الآلاء ونصلي ونسلم على خير خلقه محمد. اللهم صل على محمد النبي وعلى أزواجه أمهات المؤمنين وعلى ذريته وأهل بيته صلاة وسلاما دائمين متلازمين إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، يقول الله تبارك وتعالى: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد, dear brothers, actually nations are usually challenged intellectually before they get challenged in the economical level or the military level. And it is the common case that advanced countries usually try to influence the less advanced countries by their cultures, by their thoughts, by their lifestyle, before they even penetrate them using economics or using military force. That's why establishing an intellectual base in any society is something very important. And there is no way you will establish such a base without knowledge and without having scholars. And actually the same challenge, the same scenario happened at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. He was sent to everyone, but it started with his immediate tribe, which was Quraysh. And Quraysh was primitive people. They didn't have much knowledge. They didn't have much legacy. So when they wanted to figure out whether the Prophet ﷺ is a true prophet from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they resorted to the Jews, because the Jews actually were older in knowledge and they received the revelation through Musa alayhi salam before Quraysh. Actually, Quraysh is the type of people who never received any revelation. وَكَذَلِكَ أَرْسَلْنَاكَ فِي أُمَّةٍ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهَا أُمَمٌ. So what happened is that Quraysh sent a delegation, two of their big figures. I think the name of the two people who went to Quraysh is Al-Nadr ibn al-Harith and Uqba ibn Abi Ma'id. They were sent to the Jews, telling them, you have the book before Muhammad, and you know the religious knowledge much more about us. So tell us difficult questions. We can ask it to Muhammad and we see his answer. So if he answered the correct way, at least we know that he is saying the truth. And if he didn't figure the correct answer, that would be more supportive evidence to us when we fight him. So the Jews told them, ask Muhammad about three things. Ask him about a bunch of youth centuries ago who went out of their home or who fled their homes and then disappeared. And no one knew about them except after a long time later. And ask him about a big king who went around the earth. And ask him about the ruh, the soul or the spirit, whatever you want to translate. I usually translate it as the soul. And what is more interesting about these three questions was that the Prophet was not supposed to answer all of them. Actually, the Jews told them, if he answered all of them, then he is not a prophet. What he is supposed to do is to answer two and stop about the third one. So that was an interesting point. Actually, answering all of them would indicate or would be an indicator that he is not an actual or real prophet from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And yes, the people of Quraysh did what they were exactly told to do, and they came to the Prophet asking him about these three questions. And as you know, the Prophet ﷺ himself was illiterate. He didn't have knowledge himself except what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals to him. So of course he didn't have such knowledge, so he didn't answer on the spot. But with the confidence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reveal to him the answer, he told them, okay, inshallah tomorrow, pay attention to the word tomorrow, I will answer you. Assuming that when they leave, Jibreel will come back with the answers. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to teach us through the Prophet that when we are looking for something in the future, we should delegate the discretion and the decision of that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So instead of saying, I will answer you tomorrow, the Prophet ﷺ should have said, I will answer you insha'Allah without specifying a date when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells me this answer. And to complete the lesson to us before the Prophet ﷺ, Jibreel was delayed 15 nights, not coming down to the Prophet. And of course that was a period very difficult on the Prophet ﷺ because he felt that he is falling short in front of Quraysh and he is not capable of answering their challenging questions. And by the end of the 15th night, Jibreel came back, and he came back actually with a surah that we are recommended to read every Friday, which is the Surah Al-Kahf, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala narrated the stories related to these three questions. Actually, to be accurate, not related to these three questions, related to the first two. But the third question about the ruh was answered in another surah, which is Surah Al-Isra, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. This verse is in Surah Al-Isra. It is not in Surah Al-Kahf. Surah Al-Kahf actually answered the first two questions. So in Surah Al-Kahf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave full account about the first two questions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered about Ashab al-Kahf, these young people who believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But their trial and their exam was that they lived during the time of an oppressive king. And that king was not just worshipping his own gods beside Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he was also forcing other people to do the same thing. And not only that, he was following and monitoring his people to make sure that if he heard about anyone worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he subjected him to very severe torture. So there was like a kind of Eid festival to them, and the intelligence of the king were required to watch who came to the celebration and who didn't come. And they noticed that the people of Al-Kahf didn't attend the celebration. So they immediately reported that to the king, and the king ordered that he should be arrested. And when they realized that, they said, as the Quran mentioned, إِنَّهُمْ إِنْ يَظْهَرُوا عَلَيْكُمْ يَرْجُمُوكُمْ أَوْ يُعِيدُوكُمْ فِي مِلَّتِهِمْ وَلَن تُفْلِحُوا إِذًا أَبَدًا. If they manage to capture you, يَرْجُمُوكُمْ, they will stone you, meaning they will put you to death. أَوْ يُعِيدُوكُمْ فِي مِلَّتِهِمْ, and if you accept to go back to their religion, then they will take that from you. وَلَن تُفْلِحُوا إِذًا أَبَدًا, and then you deviated from the way of success. And because they realized that they have no capacity to challenge the king and all the community around them, and the community around them at that time was basically on the side of the king, they applied what we call today passive defense. So the passive defense was to go away and leave their homes and hide in the cave. And in the cave, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala covered them with His mercy and actually put them to sleep, not dying. He didn't take away their souls, but He just put them to sleep in very extraordinary phenomena that modern medicine doesn't have any explanation to it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put them to sleep, long sleep, about 3 centuries. And if you count it with the Hijri calendar, it is 309 years. وَلَبِثُوا فِي كَهْفِهِمْ 300 سِنِينَ وَازْدَادُوا 9. And not only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put them to sleep, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made environmental conditions around them such that their bodies stay intact. So when they wake up after few centuries, 3 centuries and plus, their bodies were okay. The only thing that they were so hungry, so they went one of them outside to bring some food. And of course, after 3 centuries, everything has changed. It is the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nothing stays on earth constant for a long time. Everything is dynamic. That oppressive king already went away, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replaced him with a just one. And the people at that time were all believers. And it was a good news to hear about them, because when the one who went to buy the food for them, he showed to the seller, an old coin. He told them, where did you get this coin? This coin used to exist only a few centuries. And then through that man, they tracked them until they figured out about these old young people. They heard about them, and they heard about disappearance few centuries ago. And that put, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He ordered them to build a masjid on them. And it was such a good and pleasant news to them to figure out where they hide and to watch one of the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that their bodies stayed as they are. And of course, it is not normal at all for people to stay up or asleep for 3 centuries. And that put the basis of the concept and the principle of documenting history. Without documenting when these youth have disappeared, and without documenting their conflict with the king, we wouldn't know one of the big signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the principles of history documentation, or what we call it nowadays philosophy of history, where we search about the pattern behind the events and the causes behind what happened, which was actually, Quran was 1400 years ahead of a famous French philosopher who established, let me remember his name. Actually, he has a famous book on the internet. You can download it. It is called spirit of laws. It is called a spirit of laws, and his name is, let me remember, but if you just put on the internet spirit of laws, you will find that French philosopher who was the first to put the principles of how history should be documented. Actually, if you look at the Quran, you will find the same principles in higher elaboration. And if you look at Al-Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun, you will also find the same thing, also established with case studies and so many examples on it. So that was the answer of the first story about the people of the cave, Ashab al-Kahf. The second question was about Dhil Qarnayn. Dhil Qarnayn was a just king. So the first question was related to oppressive king. That one is about very just and very good king. And Dhul Qarnayn had very influential trip, actually three of them. In the first trip, he went to the east side. And in the second trip, he went to the west side. And the west side at that time, remember, the two Americas were not explored yet. And the third trip was to current Turkey nowadays, where he find the people, as the Quran described them, فَوَجَدَ مِن دُونِهِمَا قَوْمًا لَا يَكَادُونَ يَفْقَهُونَ قَوْلًا. His appearance is actually one of the major signs of the Day of Judgment. At that time, they used to invade them and caused a lot of corruption. So what they did, they asked Dhil Qarnayn to protect them from Ya'juj and Ma'juj. And they actually offered him some monetary reward for that, but he turned it down and he said, مَا مَكَّنِّي فِيهِ رَبِّي خَيْرٌ فَأَعِينُونِي بِقُوَّةٍ أَجْعَلْ بَيْنَكُمْ وَبَيْنَهُمْ عَدْمًا. And Dhul Qarnayn, by the help of those people, he built a big dam that prevented the invasions of Ya'juj wa Ma'juj. And actually, Ya'juj and Ma'juj are still imprisoned and captured behind this dam. And the moment that dam will collapse and Ma'juj wa Ma'juj will come out, actually this is one of the major signs, one of the 10 major signs of the Day of Judgment. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم. اللهم صل على محمد النبي وعلى أزواجه أمهات المؤمنين وعلى ذريته وأهل بيته صلاة وسلاما دائمين متلازمين إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا. يقول الله سبحانه وتعالى: قل هل يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون فاتقوا الله يا أولي الألباب. So the third question that was directed to the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam was about the ruh. And as I mentioned in the first khutbah, the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam was not supposed to answer this question. And the Jews, the Jewish scholars, were very clever. They told the Quraysh, if he answered the third one, he is not a prophet. What he is supposed to do is not to answer this question and to say something around the meaning of I don't know. And that's exactly what the Quran came down to say. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ. They ask you about the soul. قُلْ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. Say that the soul, its knowledge, is related to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is beyond the knowledge and the sensational zone of human being. So nowadays, when we talk about one of the outcome of wisdom is to realize the limits and the boundaries of human knowledge. We have to realize that our human knowledge is limited. It is limited by the zone and the scope of our senses. Our eyes can sense objects up to a certain minority, and can also detect very far distant object up to a certain point. Beyond that, if something is too far, you will not be able to see, and if something is too small, so for example in the level of femto meter, also you will not be able to figure it even with the most advanced microscopes we have nowadays. It is something we cannot figure out. So our senses are limited, and also our deduction and induction capabilities are also limited. So our human knowledge has limits, and it is one of the signs of wisdom is you recognize these limits. And that's exactly what the Prophet ﷺ mentioned. Ar-ruhu min amri rabbi. It is not up to human, it is not within the capacity of humans to figure out what the ruh is. And actually, apart from knowing what the ruh is, it is one of the things that distinguish between believers and disbelievers. Because you know that Marxism and materialism in general, materialism always refer things to economic and materialistic reason. They always explain things based on something tangible, something observable, and they deny any impact of spiritual or symbolic meaning. And they put that under the title of metaphysics, which is basically, in their sense, is almost equivalent to legends and non-science. For us, we believe that the ruh is not a feature. The ruh is not art. If you want, it's not universal. If you want to use the philosophical term, the ruh is an entity that Malak al-Maut, Azrael alayhi salam, will actually collect. So it is something that exists. It is an entity. It is not a feature. It is not a description. However, this entity, the nature of it, is totally beyond what we can detect and realize. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered him to say, Ar-ruhu min amri rabb. So while materialistic people deny the existence of a ruh, and they do research, medical research, in order to figure out ways for reviving the body after people die, you know that nowadays in many labs in the West, they freeze the body, hoping that one day will come, they can figure out what makes this body alive again. For us Muslims, we believe that what makes the bodies alive is not because of organic or biological reason. It is because of lacking the ruh, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enabled in that particular angel Azrael to collect it. And it is also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who ordered an angel when we are in the wombs of our mothers. After 4 months, that angel will come and ينفخ الروح في بطن أمه. That this ruh will be breathed, will be incorporated inside that embryo, which is inside the womb of the mother. And up to this moment, that embryo will be transformed from a biological entity to a human being that have all the privileges and the special characters of the human being. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا وقلبا خاشعا ورزقا واسعا وحلالا طيبا واشفنا من كل داء. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات. اللهم علمنا وفقهنا في دينك. اللهم علمنا وفقهنا في دينك وقربنا منك واجعل لنا نورا من عندك واقبضنا وأنت راض عنا برحمتك وفضلك يا أرحم الراحمين. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم وأقم الصلاة.